In the dead of night, Tero stormed into the mansion, filled with anger, and shouted at Goyo that Melissy had died because of her. Goyo was completely taken aback and couldn't comprehend what had happened or why he was blaming her. She asked Tero, not believing what she had heard, "What do you mean?" Tero started screaming, blaming Melissy's husband, Marquis Beetlejuice, for destroying their entire family on charges of treason. But the worst part was that he had disposed of his own wife, Melissy. Goyo was in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at him in horror and burst into tears, collapsing to the ground, unable to comprehend how someone could be so cruel. Suddenly, Tero rudely told her that she should have died instead of Melissy, reminding her that she had once rejected a marriage proposal from Beetlejuice. With tears streaming down her face, Goyo taught to herself he was wrong, that she had always loved only him and wanted to be his wife, which is why she had turned down Beetlejuice. But Tero, filled with regret, told her that she didn't belong in the position of Madame Alt. He forcefully grabbed her shoulders and shook her, shouting that it wasn't her place. Goyo was in immense pain, her soul aching, and she pleaded with him to stop. But he continued to shout, insisting that Melissy should be the one standing in front of him, not Goyo. Thankfully, the maids arrived just in time and pulled Goyo away from her husband's grasp, while Tero's assistant tried to calm him down. In a daze, Tero grabbed his assistant, tears welling up in his eyes, and let out a heavy sigh, uttering Melissy's name. Goyo cried uncontrollably, realizing that all he wanted was Melissy. She thought to herself that he wished she was the one who had died instead. Goyo began reminiscing about her half-sister, Melissy, the daughter of her stepmother, and how she used to be so joyful and beautiful, even before marrying Tero. Goyo had a suspicion that her husband, Tero, had feelings for her. She always hoped that it was just a passing fancy, but Goyo couldn't shake off her unease. She cried and kept saying that if she had known this would happen, she would have married Beetlejuice instead. Then, her sister Melissy would still be alive. The maids prepared a hot bath for Goyo with rose petals and brought her a bottle of wine. As Goyo sat in the bathtub, she looked at the glass of wine and asked the maid where her husband, Tero, was. The maid informed her that he had gone to work and would be very late. Goyo asked the maid to leave her alone and not let anyone in. Holding the glass of wine, she pondered over her situation for a long time. Eventually, she decided to drink it, knowing it contained poison. She believed she could leave this world without regrets since Tero already had another woman who resembled her sister Melissy. Goyo lost consciousness after consuming the poison, and the glass slipped from her hands, shattering into pieces. Her last thoughts were directed at Tero, expressing her willingness to die as he had desired. Suddenly, night fell, but Goyo heard someone's voice calling out to her, urging her to wake up. Frantically, she opened her eyes and couldn't comprehend what was happening. Goyo looked around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. She hadn't died from the poison, or perhaps they had found her quickly. A maid sat beside her, smiling, and expressed relief that she had woken up. Goyo then recognized the maid as Annie and questioned her presence. It was then that she realized she was in her own room. However, she couldn't fathom how this was possible since her house had burned down 7 years ago, leaving nothing behind. A man entered the room and expressed his joy at her awakening. Goyo was stunned when she saw him, for it was her father. He smiled at her, waiting for her to approach him and embrace him. But Goyo was taken aback by these events, as her father had passed away a long time ago. 4 days had gone by, and the weather had been absolutely stunning. The sun shone brightly, casting its warm rays on everything in sight. Goyo sat in her room, enjoying her breakfast, but her mind was filled with confusion. She couldn't comprehend what had happened. As she got up and looked at herself in the mirror, she couldn't help but feel like she had been transported back in time to when she was 22 years old. Thoughts raced through her mind as she walked around the room. The Beetlejuice family was still intact, her marriage to Tero hadn't taken place yet, and her sister hadn't married Beetlejuice. And she realized that this time, she had the chance to change everything. Goyo made the decision to accept Beetlejuice's offer of marriage. However, deep down, she knew that this decision would ultimately lead to her own demise. Goyo had already accepted her fate, knowing that death awaited her. But she was determined to make the most of her time in the Beetlejuice mansion. During breakfast, Tero approached her, but Goyo stood up from the table and made it clear that they could no longer be friends after their engagement was called off. Tero was taken aback, looking into her eyes and asking for an explanation. Goyo simply lowered her head and told him that he was now engaged to Melissy, urging him to behave appropriately for her sake. Tero was left speechless, unable to comprehend the situation. Goyo didn't show any signs of anger. The first thing she did after coming back to life was to break off her engagement with Tero, and surprisingly, it was a simple task, which had caused her immense pain. As they sat at the table, Goyo expressed her hope that he would never see her again for personal reasons. Tero couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked her why she had made such a decision. Goyo remained silent, looking at him with sadness in her eyes. He slammed his fist, his anger evident as he questioned her about the truth behind her agreement to marry Beetlejuice. He demanded to know why she would agree if she was being forced. Goyo let out a deep sigh and explained that it had nothing to do with Beetlejuice, but Tero refused to give up. He couldn't understand why she would agree to something she didn't dream of, but Tero expressed her desire for a loving family and explained that happiness couldn't be found in a marriage of convenience. She looked at him sadly and told him that he knew that, yet he loved her sister. Finally, Goyo gathered the courage to tell him that she didn't want to see him anymore and that their relationship was over. Tero didn't take it well and urged her to reconsider, warning her about the lack of love in a political marriage. Goyo mockingly replied that love wasn't her priority at the moment and that she wasn't getting any younger. She suggested that it would be better for her to hurry up and get married, otherwise, who would give her the love she truly desired? Tero was left speechless. The room fell into a heavy silence. Goyo announced to him that even if she had 100 lives, she would never marry him. Finally, he broke the silence and asked for her hand, stating that he would break his engagement with Melissy and they would get married. This took her by surprise. She told him he's crazy. Suddenly someone entered the room. It was Beetlejuice, standing at the door with a smile. They turned to him, shocked, and Goyo could only utter his name in disbelief. Tero, on the other hand, confronted him, questioning how he dared to come here. Beetlejuice simply responded with a smile, stating that he had come to visit his girlfriend and that he didn't need permission for such a thing. Goyo was pleasantly surprised when he presented her with a stunning bouquet of roses. She expressed her gratitude and couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't informed her about his visit beforehand. In a sarcastic tone, Beetlejuice replied that he was equally surprised since they had already agreed to get engaged, implying that he didn't need her ex's permission to see her. Tero, feeling angry, was about to confront Beetlejuice, but he decided to use his magic to send him away. With a bright flash and a wave of his hand, Beetlejuice made Tero disappear. Goyo, amazed by the spectacle, asked Beetlejuice where he had taken Tero and what had happened to him. Beetlejuice chuckled and assured her not to worry, as Tero was a capable knight who would return unharmed. He sent him to a beautiful place to relax. Goyo was amazed by his skills and asked Annecy about it. It turned out to be teleportation, and he confidently claimed to be skilled in magic. He mentioned that it was a simple spell and requested to be called by his first name, Annecy. This bothered him because she referred to her ex by his first name and him by his last name. Goyo explained that Tero was just a childhood friend and nothing more. Annecy suggested she calls Tero Sir Alt, because there's no better way than calling someone by their last name to show distance, and questioned why her ex-fiancé had come to her. She revealed that Tero felt responsible for the cancellation of their engagement and was worried about her being in a political marriage. Annecy asked if it wasn't his fault, to which she admitted that he had feelings for her sister, leading to the breakup, so in the end he broke off the engagement, yet he comes to stop her from marrying someone else. Annecy comments that he's irresponsible. Meanwhile Tero wondered where he was. He's still furious with Annecy. Suddenly, a massive green predator with sharp fangs sneaked behind Tero and growled. Tero was startled and slowly turned around, ready to defend himself with his sword. Just as he faced the beast, it growled and lunged at him. Tero managed to raise his sword and stabbed the predator. He sat on top of the defeated beast and used his navigation device to determine his location. After studying the map, he realized he was on Avalanche Mountain. It's a place forbidden by the royal family. Humans haven't entered there for 4 years. Determined, Tero gritted his teeth and called out Annecy's name. 3 weeks later, Annecy and Goyo tied the knot in a grand celebration. The wedding was filled with guests, and Goyo looked stunning in her pink and white dress. Finally, she was marrying Annecy. The bridesmaids surrounded the bride, fixing her dress and makeup as the celebration was about to begin. Suddenly, someone entered the room and inquired if the bride was ready. Goyo turned around and saw her stepmother, accompanied by her half-sister Melissy and their mother. The stepmother didn't offer congratulations, but instead highlighted the influence of the Marquis of Annecy, mentioning that the engagement was only 3 weeks old and yet the grand wedding was already prepared. However, Melissy took the opportunity to wish her sister a happy marriage and a lifetime of joy. Goyo expressed her gratitude and inquired about Melissy's upcoming wedding to Tero, wondering if they were planning for the following year. Melissy explained that it was unlikely for Goyo to attend, as she would be preoccupied with preparations and wouldn't have time to celebrate. After a moment of silence, Melissy asked about Tero and whether he had been in touch. Goyo was surprised to learn that he hadn't returned from the mountains yet, and Melissy mentioned sending him a message about the dangers of training there. The wedding festivities commenced, with the venue adorned with flowers and scented banners. The priest began a prayer, asking the bride if she vowed to love her groom until death. Goyo gazed at her fiancé, exchanged smiles, and affirmed her commitment. The priest declared that the groom could now kiss his bride, and the newlyweds bid farewell to their guests, departing on a boat for their honeymoon under the night sky. Goyo was sitting on the terrace in her dress, gazing sadly at the water, when Annecy quietly approached her from behind. He gently placed his jacket over her shoulders, to which she expressed her gratitude. Annecy reassured her that there was no need to thank him, as she was now his wife. Goyo Beetlejuice, not Goyo Rubiette. Goyo felt embarrassed and admitted that she was still getting used to her new name. The memory of her ex-fiancé, Tero, not calling her Madame Alt crossed her mind, making her feel like he never truly considered her his wife. Annecy then asked her why she didn't aim to become a duchess. Goyo was taken aback and explained that it didn't suit her, as she wasn't good at small talk. When asked about her dreams, Goyo revealed her desire for a loving family, stemming from her parents' unhappy marriage. Annecy empathized with her, acknowledging the challenges they faced. Goyo confessed that she had given up on her dreams, finding solace in a heart at ease. Curious, she asked Annecy about his dreams. After a moment of contemplation, he joked about wanting absolute power, that no one can touch, he can even slay thousands for that, only to reveal that he truly longed for a peaceful family life. Goyo smiled. She couldn't help but think about her fiancé, Annecy, who had shattered the Rubiette family. Which is one of the two great duke families. As she pondered his ambitions, she realized that by the time his dreams come true, she might no longer be alive. Annecy suddenly asked her what she thought about their honeymoon. She remained silent as he placed his hand on his heart and expressed his appreciation for her, even if he couldn't give her love. She assured him that she believed him. As they shared a kiss, she silently prayed that he didn't love her, as she didn't want to trust anything unreliable anymore. Meanwhile, Tero appeared outside the Rubiette dukedom palace, holding a sword and dressed in dirty, torn clothes. People around him whispered, curious about what had happened to him. The guards approached him as he approached the palace, telling him to leave quickly. Tero instructed him to inform Beetlejuice of his return. The word had already reached the Beetlejuice estate about Tero's return, confirmed by Exer, a longtime servant of Annecy. Annecy expressed annoyance at Tero's quick return, wishing he had teleported him further away. He ordered his servant to ensure that Goyo didn't find out. The servant noticed how much the master cared for Miss Goyo, but Annecy sternly warned him not to speak out of turn. He reminded the servant that Goyo was his wife and the mistress of the property. Exer apologized and refrained from mentioning Miss Goyo again. Annecy was left alone, contemplating how nothing changes. The next day, Annecy took Goyo to his magnificent garden, which left her delighted. He felt proud that she was impressed and asked if she liked the beautiful garden filled with flowers. Goyo replied affirmatively and described the garden as pretty beautiful. Annecy admitted that he hadn't considered her dislike for shiny things, which was his mistake. He should have asked for her opinion first. She objected, acknowledging that the glitter of the roses was a bit overwhelming, but she didn't hate it. She also mentioned that the gardener must have put in a lot of effort. Annecy chuckled and mentioned that this was just his little hobby, as magic made it easier. Goyo was amazed that such a magical garden could be created. He explained that with magic, anything was possible. Magic could make dreams come true or even harm someone, depending on the sorcerer's intentions. Goyo was deeply impressed and listened attentively. Annecy then asked if she wanted him to teach her magic. Surprised, she declined, stating that it wasn't worth teaching her as she couldn't use it. The protagonist shared her childhood experiences of trying to use magic, But all her efforts were in vain, regardless of the money and time she invested. He assured her that one can never be certain of their capabilities and advised her not to worry because her teacher was the best magician in the world. As it grew dark, the sky painted a fiery sunset, casting soft shades of orange, pink, and violet. Annecy led his wife to a bright and luxurious room with a large, comfortable bed, informing her that it was their bedroom. She glanced around and noticed a portal. Annecy explained that she could use it anytime since they were on the 4th floor. Goyo was surprised to discover such a portal in the mansion and remarked on its convenience. He chuckled and jokingly asked her what she expected from a magician's property. When she approached the bed, she noticed there was only one and inquired about her own bed. Annecy, taken aback, asked if she didn't want to share a room with him. She lowered her head and said she didn't mind, but suddenly she remembered how she used to live with Tero, with separate rooms, and she always thought that was normal. Annecy asked her once again if she was okay with sleeping together in the same bed. She replied that she didn't mind at all. There was sadness in her eyes as she realized that married couples usually sleep in the same bed, and it was considered normal. Afterward, she decided to ask him about having children, if he wanted them soon. She was willing to take on her marital responsibilities, but she didn't want to rush into having children. Annecy agreed with her, saying it was too soon for that. She closed her eyes and mentioned that she would consider taking birth control pills later, but Annecy was against it, stating it wasn't necessary and that the pills had side effects. Besides, this was a political marriage, so there was no need to rush. She was deeply moved by these words. She couldn't believe it, but she agreed with him and made a promise. He looked at her with longing. Before Goyo returned to the past when she died, Annecy was informed that she had passed away due to a heart attack. Shortly before her death, she had been using Silverbell to lower her blood pressure, as his loyal servant had revealed. The servant informed him that the problem lay in the combination of medications, which had a side effect. Annecy closed his eyes, unwilling to believe it, and pondered over it. However, he continued, sharing that almost no one knew how worried she was, and she felt sorry for this unfortunate incident. Annecy asked the servant once again if he truly believed it was an accident. Exo, the servant, didn't understand what the owner meant by this. Before they got married, Goyo's mother's name Asla Valverde, she was from Dopchi and unfortunately died of a heart attack caused by a silver bell. This revelation made Exo understand the significance of it. Annecy, influenced by Goyo's departure, decided to leave as well. Annecy grabbed his jacket and headed towards the exit, expressing gratitude that she chose this particular method to end it. However, the servant questioned if Tero would easily give up her body. Annecy reassured him, promising to retrieve her at any cost, and left. Goyo lay peacefully in a coffin adorned with white lilies. Tero stood beside her, crying and pleading for her to wake up and stay with him. Suddenly, Annecy appeared and confronted Tero, expressing how he had always been neglectful before. Annecy wondered why he didn't care for her earlier when it wasn't too late. Annecy approached the coffin. Tero's anger surged, and he drew his sword, ready to strike. Annecy, prepared with his own sword, stood up to defend himself. Tero accused him of being responsible for her family's destruction and charged towards him. However, a magical shield protected Annecy, emitting a bright blue light in the room. Tero, furious and bewildered, couldn't comprehend what had happened to his sword. Annecy, with a smile, informed him that he wouldn't leave without her body. Tero refused to give up, warning him not to speak nonsense. Annecy calmly replied that it didn't matter what he did, as he regretted the situation and had no other choice. With a snap of his fingers, the coffin levitated in the air, causing fear in Tero and the servants. Annecy turned to Tero and shouted back, stating that he should have considered the consequences before. A portal materialized in the room, and Annecy led the coffin through it, disappearing from sight. At the stroke of midnight, the moon cast its bright light into the room where Annecy and Goyo lay in bed, back to back. Goyo couldn't sleep, her mind filled with thoughts of her husband. It was the first time she had ever shared a bed with someone, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, afraid that he might hear her every breath. Goyo, lost in her own thoughts, reminisced about how he had never spent a night with Tero, despite their love and marriage. As Goyo closed her eyes, Annecy noticed her restlessness and empathized with the difficulty she must be facing in falling asleep. Eventually, Goyo drifted off to sleep, and Annecy quietly slipped out of bed, making his way towards the dungeon door. From within, a voice cried out for help, and Annecy could see a man, exhausted and covered in blood, chained and dirty. The door creaked open, and as the man raised his head, he struggled to recognize who stood before him. It was a well-dressed man, seemingly from a wealthy background, wearing black patent shoes. He entered the dungeon and asked if Count Eliam remembered him. The man immediately recognized him as Prince Annecy. Surprised, Annecy remarked that it was difficult to call an illegitimate son a prince. He introduced himself as Annecy Beetlejuice, explaining how he had risen from being a commoner to gaining fame and the title of Marquis. The man found it hard to believe, recounting how the prince had once sold him into slavery. Annecy confirmed his words, revealing that the man who had bought him was named Balberti. Overwhelmed, the man couldn't fathom that it was Balberti, and just then, another person entered the dungeon, standing at the threshold. The prisoner gazed at the man standing by the door. Annecy inquired if he had heard of the man who controlled a significant portion of the underground capital. Exo, the representative, was pointed out by Annecy. The man, visibly annoyed, questioned the involvement of the Balberti in the matter. Annecy explained the current situation to him. The man denied any knowledge and shifted the blame to Rubiacy. Annecy chuckled, questioning how he could claim ignorance when the Empress had received information about the illegitimate son, possibly from Duke Rubiacy. The prisoner was at a loss for words. Suddenly, Annecy grabbed him by the hair, warning him that time was running out. Annecy, still holding him, raised his head and accused him of secretly supporting the second prince, leading to a silent agreement between the first prince and the Rubiacy until the revelation of the illegitimate son. Annecy demanded to know the whereabouts of Mazel. The man, closing his eyes, admitted she was dead. Enraged, he struck the prisoner, causing him to bleed. The prisoner confessed that his actions were driven by jealousy towards Eliza and that revealing the truth to the Empress was his way of destroying Eliza. Desperate, he pleaded for respect and revealed that he was once sold to the Balberti, questioning if Annecy would have reached his current position without such actions. Annecy remained silent as the man warned him of a life in shadows if he continued down this path. If he holds such a position, then why does he behave so disgustingly? Annecy asked him with a smile what was so appealing about the Marquis title anyway. Apparently, that wasn't satisfying enough for him. The man looked at him questioningly and explained that he had always been belittled, and now he wanted to settle the score by becoming a Grand Duke. He added that this wasn't even his ultimate goal, as with such a title, he could enter the fight for the throne and everything could turn out well. When the prisoner indignantly shouted at him, claiming he was completely insane and that this was treason, Annecy calmly informed him that this was simply the legal order of succession to the throne. The servant, Exo, handed the sword to his master. Annecy took the sword and pressed it against the prisoner's throat, giving him one last chance. He asked him again, "Where is that traitor Mazel now?" The prisoner remained silent, and then Annecy made a small cut on his neck, causing blood to immediately flow. Finally, the man spoke, revealing that the Marquis was already in Albray and had boarded a ship heading to the port of Porcendo. That was all he knew. Annecy handed the sword back to Exo and ordered him to kill the prisoner. The man tried to intervene, but the Marquis had already left. Exo entered his master's room and informed him that he had killed the prisoner, expressing his fear that the master himself would kill him. Annecy replied that he despised the smell of blood, and his wife was sensitive to smell. Exo then asked the master if it was true that he was going to claim the throne. Annecy responded that he wasn't certain yet, as his whole life he had only strived to be better than others, hoping that it would at least fill a small void in his heart. Exo inquired about the master's plans if things didn't go as expected. He asked what changes the master would make if he were to take the throne. Annecy approached the window and expressed that he will be the head of Balberti, but he acknowledged that nobody in the empire shared his opinion. Whether he became emperor or tyrant, he would still face overthrow. Annecy told his servant that he was not destined to find happiness and that nothing would truly change if he became ruler. However, he emphasized that if he does not take any drastic actions, as it would make him invisible to others. Esco asked if it would have been better for Annecy if Balberti hadn't saved him. Annecy replied that without Balberti, he would have been sold to someone terrible and would have perished. He had no other option but to hold on to his promise to Chloe. Suddenly, he decided to ask the servant about Tero Alt. Esco explained that the dukedom originally belonged to Tero's mother, but after her passing, the title passed to her husband. Tero was only 4 years old at the time. Esko handed over some papers with information to the gentleman, who carefully studied them and admitted that he didn't know everything about it. Annecy read the papers and discovered that Tero Alt had a younger brother who was now 18 years old and also talented, making him a potential heir. The servant asked the master if he had considered changing the head of the Alt family, to which he replied that he had indeed thought about it. While going through the newspapers, Annecy suddenly came across a photograph of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to his wife, Goyo. Esko mentioned that the woman in the photo was Tero's mother, the previous duchess. The gentleman objected, claiming that his wife was 100 times more beautiful. Annecy, looking at the photograph, pondered about Goyo and realized why Tero was so attached to her. At the gala ball, the musician played the piano while all the guests gathered in stunning outfits. However, amidst the crowd, little Goyo appeared sad, dressed in a simple gray dress. Someone called out to her, and when she turned around, she saw Tero approaching her, apologizing for being late. Goyo asked if her dress seemed strange, as it was the one he had chosen. Tero reassured her, saying that she looked very good and that modest clothes suited her. As she looked around, she felt like people were whispering and laughing at her. Despite everyone wearing fashionable dresses, she preferred something simpler. Is mom used to dress like that? Tero mentioned that his family also preferred such clothes because their family valued simplicity and didn't pay much attention to appearances. Goyo chimed in, saying that there was nothing wrong with liking pretty things. Tero assured Goyo that she was beautiful even in simple clothes, causing her cheeks to turn red with embarrassment. The boy smiled at her, affirming that it was true, and then asked if she could promise to only wear such clothes in the future. Surprised, Goyo looked at him, and he explained that she didn't need to wear elegant dresses because simplicity suited her better. Goyo wanted to respond, but she couldn't find the words. She realized that she didn't hate luxury, she simply didn't want unnecessary attention. Tero told her that she was even more beautiful and asked for her promise. Goyo thought about the promise that she would not wear fancy outfits in the future. However, as she made the promise, everything around her seemed to dim, as if a cloud was hanging over her head. Tero looked at her angrily and accused her of breaking her promise. Confused, Goyo didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, Tero grabbed her by the neck and started to strangle her. The boy she once knew had transformed into an adult, strong and filled with rage. He was strangling her, demanding to know why she married Annecy. He exclaims that luxury didn't suit her. Goyo's tears flowed as Tero ignored her pleas and continued his assault. He accused her of breaking her promise to only wear simple things, choking and screaming that he only loved Melissy. He married Goyo out of stubbornness, and now she dared to leave him and marry someone else. His voice echoed through the room as he threatened to make her miserable. Suddenly, his tone changed and he yelled at her to come back. She yelled back that she didn't want to. Then she woke up, opened her eyes, and realized it was just a dream. Annecy sat nearby and asked if she was awake. Goyo got up and started recalling the dream. Annecy asked what she had dreamed, wondering if it was a nightmare. He apologized for not waking her up earlier. Unexpectedly, Annecy hugged her tightly. Goyo was taken aback and didn't know how to react. He told her that if she didn't want the hug, she could push him away, but Goyo simply smiled and remained silent. Eventually, she decided to confide in him about the dream. She explained how Tero had appeared in her dream, attempting to strangle her and questioning her broken promise. It felt so real that she was frightened. Annecy listened attentively and suggested that she should do the same with Tero when they met. But Annecy argued that even though it was a dream, Goyo was still hurt and Tero had committed a crime, as there is no punishment for sleeping. Annecy offered Goyo some hot tea to help her calm down. She expressed her gratitude towards him and the terrible nightmare crossed her mind once again, but she felt much better overall. Thanks to Annecy, together, they gazed at the starry sky. Suddenly, she requested him not to destroy the rose garden. Annecy looked at her in surprise and mentioned that he thought she didn't care about it. The girl thought about the beautiful roses in the garden and recalled Tero's words. He had mentioned that only simple things suited her, which is why she rejected anything elaborate, but she could also appreciate intricate things. Goyo informed Annecy that she avoided such things because she wasn't accused to them. He advised her not to pay attention to that guy. That's right, Goyo thought. Once again, she recollected the dream and her past. Yes, she had promised Tero that she wouldn't like anything fancy or dress extravagantly, But what was the point of keeping her word if he didn't keep his first? Tero was left alone after losing that little girl in a simple dress. Tero, who had become wealthier, arrived at the Goyo's family mansion and was warmly welcomed by Melissy. She mentioned that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. "It really has been a long time," Tero replied as he approached her. He noticed that her dress was very similar to Goyo's. It was the first time Tero had seen her in such an outfit. Tero pondered over it and remembered his ex-girlfriend. He concluded that Goyo was more suitable for this. Suddenly, Melissy asked him why he had come. Perhaps he wanted to see her sister. "No," Tero replied, closing his eyes. He continued, stating that he could no longer dwell on the fate of a woman who foolishly abandoned herself. He informed Melissy that he had come for another reason and proposed to put off the engagement. She couldn't believe it and questioned him about why he had said that. He explained that his mind had been a mess lately and that he needed to train more. Melissy had to admit that she understood. Tero had already started to leave, but he turned back to look at her. She told him that they didn't need to rush and that it wasn't urgent anyway. Tero agreed and mentioned that he was busy that day, so he had to leave. However, Melissy grabbed his hand and pleaded with him to wait. She mentioned that her mother would be back soon and asked if he would like to meet her before leaving. Tero apologized and explained that he had urgent business to attend to, so he couldn't stay. He placed his hand on her shoulder and kissed her goodbye on the cheek. Melissy froze and didn't say anything as Tero left. As soon as he left the room, her face filled with anger. She started wiped away his kiss, until her face was bruised. She muttered that she wouldn't even look at him if he wasn't an alt. Suddenly, someone entered the room and yelled at Melissy. It was her mother, who looked at her angrily and expressed her unhappiness with what she had heard. Her mother instructed Melissy to go to her room for a serious conversation. Melissy sadly responded, "Okay, mother." The girl's face was filled with sadness as she left the room. Annecy Mansion was a beautiful place, and the day had brought sunny weather. The protagonist woke up and noticed a maid standing near her bed. The maid asked how she had slept and how her trip had gone. Goyo got up and saw her longtime faithful maid. Feeling glad that she had been transferred here, she smiled and mentioned that she had been promised a double salary. Goyo laughed and opened the curtains in response. The maid then asked if the lady would like to have breakfast in the garden, as Mr. Annecy had ordered. Goyo wondered if having breakfast in the garden would make the flowers bloom. The maid glanced out the window and suggested cooking something simple due to the beautiful weather outside. The lady proposed admiring the view, and Goyo pondered the idea before agreeing to try new things. They decided to have breakfast in the garden, which was absolutely enchanting. The garden was adorned with pinkish-red roses and fluttering blue butterflies. In the center, there was a table adorned with various plates and snacks. Goyo couldn't help but be captivated by the beauty. She turned to Annecy and mentioned her expectation of a strong smell, but was surprised to find none. Annecy responded with a smile, calling it magic. Goyo then asked if it was possible, to which Annecy replied that it would be easier to answer what was impossible. Goyo asked if it was possible for him to be humble. Annecy chuckled, praising her intelligence. For breakfast, they served Goyo a sandwich decorated with flowers and leaves. Goyo stared at the plate and inquired about the type of sandwich. Annecy smiled and described it as a beautiful and elegant sandwich, just as she had mentioned the day before. Goyo asked if Annecy had made it himself and decided to try a piece. After tasting it, she exclaimed how delicious it was and complimented Annecy on his cooking skills. Annecy laughed and thanked her for the compliment, but clarified that the chef had prepared the sandwich and he had only decorated it. Goyo made a serious face and retracted her previous statement. Annecy was touched by this. Goyo finished her sandwich, sipped her tea, and enjoyed the breathtaking view. Suddenly, Annecy asked her thoughts on learning magic. Goyo hesitated and admitted that she wasn't uninterested, but lacked confidence because she didn't excel at anything. Annecy assured her that if she was interested, she could definitely succeed. He should challenge her, and it doesn't have to be something magical. She could choose to ride a horse, draw, dance, or whatever she wants. Goyo agreed after listening and thinking about it. Then, he got up from the table and told her that they could try it now. "How are you now?" Goyo asked, but Annecy told her to listen to him. Annecy began with a brief introduction, saying that everyone has their own attribute based on talent. People have the ability to manipulate objects like water and earth. It's like a magic molecule. When he finished, he asked Goyo if she understood everything. She was a little confused and said that her confidence had disappeared somewhere. She asked him to give up the idea. Annecy just laughed and said he was sorry for deliberately complicating everything because she is very sweet when she is confused. Let's keep it simple, said Annecy. It takes more than talent. The trick is to transform the image into shape. Annecy raised his hand and a glow appeared, followed by several blue and white figures. Goyo looked surprised by the magic that was happening. Now, Annecy said, I will show you another path. It's more like creating a template that transforms the form. This is often called strength, the strength of spirit. Goyo repeated, looking at him with curiosity. It's not difficult to control, Annecy continued, if you have at least a little imagination. But certain emotions are needed to release it. He took out a device similar to a pocket watch from the box. What emotions are needed? Goyo asked. He replied that they must be strong, negative emotions. It's much more difficult for happy people. Try it once, Annecy said, and handed her the watch. Goyo extended her hands and touched the watch. The hands began to move at a dizzying speed. She looked at Annecy and asked him if he thought she would succeed. Everyone has their problems, Annecy said. Goyo whispered her problems and after making up her mind again, she touched her watch. A small bright flash appeared. Annecy observed the intense reaction occurring with the mana, which is a good sign, Annecy remarked. He then decided to contribute something of his own. He touched Goyo's hand and took the mana into his hands. Suddenly, the flash became even brighter. She felt something and shared it with Annecy, asking if that was the special feeling he had mentioned. A kind of water-based matter formed, and Goyo was thrilled, shouting that it had worked. Yes, Annecy confirmed. This is the spirit of water. He didn't expect it to work so easily. He then instructed her to imagine a shape, a tree, a person, anything concrete, or it would soon disappear. She thought of things associated with the lake and the sea, remembering a dolphin. The matter transformed into a dolphin, seeming to leap out of the water. Goyo succeeded, and Annecy told her to give the dolphin a name. After much thought, the name Watan came to mind. As soon as she said the name aloud, the dolphin leapt and twirled, becoming even clearer. Goyo looked at him in awe, but he suddenly vanished into the air. Annecy assured Goyo that he would appear when she called his name, congratulating and praising her for the honor of meeting a spirit for the first time. However, Annecy began to feel unwell and started to lose consciousness. Annecy was very worried for Goyo and embraced her to prevent her from falling. She thanked him for his concern, and Annecy explained that summoning the spirit consumes a lot of energy, suggesting that she rest. He volunteered to accompany her, but Goyo insisted she could go alone or call the servants. Annecy objected, refusing to entrust his wife to a servant and expressing jealousy. Hold on tight, Annecy said as he lifted her in his arms. The heroine was embarrassed and ordered him to let her go. He smiled at her, promising he would never tire of admiring her flushed face. While they were strolling, she mentioned that he had peculiar hobbies and inquired why nobody wanted to meet him before her. He simply responded maybe. He then pondered on the spirit she summoned. Calling the spirit entails a specific emotion. Fire represents fear. Wind signifies rage. Earth symbolizes loneliness, and water embodies what prevails in Goyo, desperation. Annecy was sitting in his office, constructing a house of cards, when his assistant, Calabi, approached him and reminded him about Goyo's upcoming birthday in January. Annecy seemed lost in thought, his finger resting on top of the house. Calabi asked if he had forgotten about it. In response, Annecy destroyed the house of cards, stating that it wasn't the problem, at that moment. He then asked Calabi for his thoughts on his relationship with Goyo. After contemplating for a while, the assistant remarked that Annecy had become sentimental and even a little crazy, becoming madly in love with his wife. Annecy pondered how he had become so affectionate. Calabi mentioned that the wedding had already taken place and there was no need for pretense. He also questioned what Goyo would think if Annecy continued showering her with affection. Annecy asked if the assistant was suggesting that he should be more sensible. Annecy began to contemplate how Goyo would react if he suddenly changed his attitude. She would be surprised at first, then close her heart and simply fulfill her duties as the Marchioness. Their relationship would never be the same, leading to a dull married life where they would only exchange greetings and farewells. If Goyo became like that, she would never call him by his name or smile at him. Suddenly, Annecy stood up, declaring, "No," at the table. The attendant inquired of Annecy about his decision. Annecy went to the window and expressed admiration for someone with such a kind character. Goyo strolled through the garden with the maids, and Annecy remarked that she appeared emotionally reserved, which gave her a slightly cruel air. However, he could see the hidden desperation she carried, and he found himself having obsessive thoughts of embracing and kissing her, which surprised even himself. The assistant agreed, noting that it was unexpected for the fearsome battlefield demon to display such tenderness, as his allies were usually terrified of him. Meanwhile, Goyo returned to her room and practiced with the spirit Watan. She commanded him to extinguish a candle, which he did promptly. Impressed, she praised him, and the spirit dissipated into the air. As she sat on the couch, she felt her strength waning, realizing that even a brief interaction with the spirit required a significant amount of energy. Goyo pondered Annecy's words about the concentration and stamina needed, acknowledging her current limitations. Lost in thought, she suddenly recalled that he had never revealed what emotion was necessary to summon Watan. She reflected on Annecy's initial impression of her and the stark contrast to his current demeanor. Meanwhile, Tero observed as Annecy and the coffin containing Goyo vanished. Grand Duke Annecy Betelgeuse took Goyo's body, prompting Tero to declare that he would find him at any cost. The knights informs Tero that Annecy went to Avalanche Mountain, but Tero commanded the guards to stay in the castle, only allowing the special forces to accompany him. Annecy stood by the coffin and cast a spell, causing magical symbols to appear around him. Esco, the servant next to him, told him it was impossible, but Annecy ignored him. He mentioned his promise to Chloe and insisted that Esco shouldn't try to stop him. Esco objected, saying that the promise was just a joke and that Goyo's mother was only a distant relative of Mrs. Chloe. Annecy told Esco to be quiet if he didn't understand the depth of Chloe's commitment to her promise. Esco expressed annoyance, but then Annecy's assistant entered the cave and thought that Esco didn't understand him. When Esco tried to stop Annecy again, Calabi intervened and reminded him that if Annecy chose his own path, they shouldn't interfere with Annecy's decisions. Annecy questioned why Calabi was there, and Calabi explained that he didn't come to stop him because he knew Annecy wouldn't listen anyway. The assistant reported that Tero had started taking action. Annecy considered going back in time, but Esco begged him to stop and think about giving up everything he had achieved in the past 10 years. Annecy replied that he was initially angry about his failures, but starting over wasn't so bad. He acknowledged Esco's devotion to Chloe, as she had once saved him from slavery, which is likely why she helps him. His successor mentioned that not even Chloe Valverde knew that his promise was a magical contract in which he would not let Goyo suffer such a terrible end. How could she act so recklessly? Esco asked him. Because breaking the contract means death, but I didn't die, Annecy said. A way back, that's why he's still alive. And if it weren't for him, this situation wouldn't even have arisen, he continued, saying that he didn't feel any sense of satisfaction after becoming a marquis or duke, a void that not even winning the throne could fill. So it's better to stop there, said Annecy and continued conjuring with the time portal. Calabi said goodbye to the master, telling him that they would soon see each other in the past. As soon as the red flash began to appear, the guards arrived with Tero. Annecy sat closer to Goyo and looked at her. Tero shouted to the guards to stop him immediately, but it was too late. Tero was already approaching the coffin when everything lit up with a bright flame, a flash, and they disappeared. And just like that, the hands of the clock went back. Annecy Betelgeuse, a child born under the moon of a witch on the day of the most powerful magic in 1,000 years. The child of the witch's day is usually weak and dies quickly, but this child was different from the others. A true demon was born among people. Even the curse of the moon witch did not care for him. Matter brought with it a powerful force, fateful and dangerous. There is no one in the world who can threaten his life. Annecy thought that he had no strength left for a second return to the past. Even if everything went well, he would have no memory of it, even though the spell was hers. Goyo and Annecy are having breakfast, and he asks her about the tea party and what she said. Yes, today there is a party, said Goyo. The girl expressed her interest in trying the event since it was free. Viscountess Ellie Vermis advertised the event. Annecy mentioned that the Vermis family is neither aristocrat nor commoner, and Goyo added that she had received many invitations but didn't know where to go. They decided that a tea party would be appropriate. He agreed and asked if she always dressed like that. She was surprised by the question and asked if she looked strange. Annecy replied with a smile, suggesting that a little pizzazz wouldn't hurt. With a snap of his fingers, her image magically transformed. Her dress became beautiful and luxurious, leaving the Goyo amazed. Annecy added the final touch by conjuring a huge, elegant necklace. He looked at her in awe and commented on her beauty and stunning appearance. Goyo praised Annecy's talent and he asked if she liked this style. The girl replied that this style was better than the previous one. Annecy smiled, held out his hand, and mentioned that he had business at the palace and would take her to Vermis on the way. Goyo looked at him curiously, and he explained that they should show people how united they were, as it was their first time going out together. She agreed, stating that it was one of her duties as a marchioness. Annecy tried to say something else, but she didn't listen and they proceeded to Vermis Castle. Goyo was greeted by two girls, Ellie Vermis and Ronte Fratil. Ronte jokingly referred to her as Lady Beetlejuice. She expressed her surprise at seeing Ronte there, and Ronte explained that she was there on business and didn't expect to see her either. Ronte complimented her beauty today. Before she got married, she mentioned that she used to dress like a widow. But the girl insisted that her wealthy husband must have influenced her fashion choices. Two more girls joined the conversation, and Ronte admitted that she was just joking, as the Rebute family never had financial issues. She laughed it off. She thought to herself that she wouldn't have come if she had known Ronte would be there. Ronte Fratil, a key figure in the conservative faction, was declared the heir to the Marquis of Fratil. Goyo couldn't understand why Ronte had been attacking her ever since. Perhaps it was because of her noble background, and Ronte despised her for her perceived lack of talent. As they entered the room with a table full of desserts, Emily Rainier greeted her warmly, expressing her concern over unflattering rumors. Goyo wondered what rumors she was referring to. Bella chimed in, mentioning that the Marquis Beetlejuice had never been involved with any women. Emily added that many people had been rejected by him. Ronte then brought up the gossip about the Marquis being very close to his assistant, Calabi. Some of the girls whispered among themselves, expressing their disapproval. Goyo clarified that if they were insinuating that Annecy Beetlejuice preferred men, it was just a rumor. Ronte joked that she had chosen the Marquis over Tero, but added that she could still have a lover. Everyone laughed, and Goyo pretended not to be offended. Ronte then turned to Goyo, admitting that she may have exaggerated a bit and asked if she is going to share all this with her husband. One of the girls reassured Goyo that she was just joking. Goyo glanced at them and realized that she should definitely inform her husband about everything. However, she decided to confront them instead, revealing that they were mocking the Marquis and invading his privacy. Perhaps it would be wise to take legal action against Charlotte. This made Ronte furious, causing her to abruptly stand up from the table. Goyo observed her and thought that Ronte used to have better self-control, but today she had crossed the line. Maybe it was because of her noble background. Ronte began shouting, claiming that she had only spread rumors. Goyo looked at her and advised her to know when to stop. She then announced that she was leaving because there was nothing more to discuss with them. As Goyo got up and started walking away, Ronte yelled at her, saying that her family wouldn't be intimidated by a commoner aristocrat. Goyo turned to her and asked if her father was as brave as she claimed to be. Ronte was livid, but Emily interrupted them and asked if Marquis Beetlejuice was going to sue Marquis Fridolin and become enemies. Goyo simply looked at them in silence. Then, Ronte grabbed a cup of hot tea and said, she forgot something. She splashed the tea on Goyo's face, causing everyone to look at her in horror. She opened her eyes and was utterly confused. Suddenly, her guardian spirit appeared and she smiled at him, thanking him for his assistance. The girls helped Ronte dry off, and she glared at Goyo with hatred. Through tears, she mentioned that the Marquis Beetlejuice seemed to protect his girlfriend so fiercely that he even gave her an artifact. Apparently, the tea was not meant for Goyo. Goyo pondered Ronte's words and thought about the artifact she mentioned. She interpreted it as a wedding gift, considering it a rare occurrence. Angrily, Ronte declared that she wouldn't give up on him so easily. Goyo warned her that she would also remember how Ronte had treated her.